My whole life, I've wondered about this. Are human beings purely physical, evolved at random and destined to die, extinguished forever? Or are we something more, a spirit or a soul with existence beyond? Which? Most people are sure. Me, I'm perplexed. Philosophers call this great question the mind-body problem. What's the relationship between our brains and our consciousness, between the stuff in our skulls and the sense in our minds? What are solutions to the mind-body problem? I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn, and Closer to Truth is my journey to find out. To approach the mind-body problem, I need a roadmap. So I'm in Boston to meet Ned Block, a science-oriented philosopher known for his clarity of thinking. Ned, what are some of the solutions to the mind-body problem?
There are three solutions that have been offered. One is perhaps the most commonsensical solution, dualism. The idea that we have some kind of immaterial soul and the mind is a state of that soul. If that solution is true, then the science of the mind, at least as we now see science, cannot succeed. A second solution is what's often called functionalism, the idea that the nature of the mind is a matter of the role in the mental economy of mental states. The idea is to see the mind along the lines of a computer program or of a computer state, which is defined by and characterized by its relations to other similar states and to sensory inputs and behavioral outputs. A third is the one that I favor, at least for consciousness, is physicalism, the idea that you can see the mind, at least the conscious part of the mind, in terms of its biological realization in the brain.
Let's start with dualism. Clearly, you don't favor it.
I don't, because if dualism is right, then the study of the mind is more in the domain of religion than of science. The debate among more scientifically oriented philosophers is really a debate between functionalism and physicalism. Mm-hmm. The functionalists are the computer people. According to the functionalist idea, the biological substrate is just one of many substrates. We could make a mind out of silicon, we can make it out of carbon, but the important thing is the functional relations that are embedded in the computer description of it. The physicalist form says that it's the biological realization that's really important, and I think in the case of consciousness, it looks like that form is on the right track. All the advances that have been made in the last 20 years in the study of consciousness have been in the study of the brain, the conscious basis of our states.
But here's my problem. That if we eliminate the possibility of anything non-physical, of any kind, then what fundamentally is different about a biological substrate than any other substrate if you're going to reproduce exactly the same type of, when we say computation, I mean that in the most general sense. Fundamentally, what would be the difference?
Okay, look, you're raising the most difficult problem about the study of consciousness. It's the problem of how we can understand why the biological basis of a given phenomenal quality is the biological basis of that quality rather than some other one or none. It's that problem that makes people dualists because they don't know how to think about it.
Let me give it to you. Let me say you'll find whatever you're looking for in the biology. Mm-hmm. But why can't that then be reproduced in silicon or in something? Mm-hmm. Why not?
The fear is that you could reproduce the function, and so you'd have the same system as far as the functionalist approach is concerned, but that you wouldn't reproduce the phenomenal feel of it. You'd have made what some people call a zombie. That is something that's functionally like us, but physically and phenomenally different. maybe phenomenally like nothing.
But the question is, what is the residue? What is the residue in the biology that after you've created all the functions someplace else, what is the residue?
Yeah.
If it's physical, you can reproduce it over here.
Right. Okay, so the two different possibilities are that it's biological or that it's functional. If it's biological, maybe you could reproduce it in silicon, but maybe you couldn't. The more physical and biological the substrate turns out to be, the more likely it is that a zombie could be made.
No, I'm not talking about a zombie.
Yeah,
You know,
okay.
I think a zombie can be made. I'm talking about a real whole thing with all the phenomenal internal feeling, because that's what we have to duplicate in order to make it real. If you say we can't do it, what is the residue you have in your biology that's preventing you from doing it over here?
The more physical and biological the nature of consciousness is, the harder it will be to produce something that functions the way we do and isn't a zombie. The problem will be if we make a silicon version of the biology of human consciousness. How will we know whether we've left out something essential? The problem is, how do we know what level of description of the human biology of consciousness is essential to consciousness? And we do not know now whether we will find a similarity metric which will allow us to tell whether another kind of being of this sort really is conscious.
If consciousness is purely physical, biological, I can't imagine why, ultimately, it couldn't be reproduced in other physical structures, including non-biological systems. Ned certainly rejects dualism, as do most philosophers, which is why I should speak with a dualist philosopher. I select Dean Zimmerman, a philosopher at Rutgers, who focuses on mind, metaphysics, and religion. So what's up with dualism, Dean? How do you defend what your colleagues dismiss?
Anybody who thinks, maybe I can survive the destruction of this body, they're on the road to some kind of substance dualism, where I'm not made out of this kind of stuff and I can somehow exist independently of it. Not many philosophers hold this view. There's still a few of us left. The substance dualist, the person who thinks my mental states are possessed by, or they're exemplified by a thing that doesn't have a mass. That person has a lot of questions to answer, obviously, and one question is just how different is this thing that's thinking from ordinary matter? And on the extreme end, you've had people who have said, I'm a thinking thing, I know that, I've got mental states, they can't be identical with any mere physical state of physical matter, and they belong to a thing that exists outside of time, outside of space. It's totally alien, very unlike any ordinary material objects. But other dualists have said, no, I'm more like ordinary material objects than that even. I'm located where my brain is, and I interact with it.
This non-physical stuff.
This non-physical stuff. Now you might ask, well, in what sense is it non-physical? It's pushing things around and it's located in space. Well, so long as it's not made out of the same kind of bits as tables and chairs and rocks.
Even in some advanced physics, no matter how advanced you get, it'll still never be made of that same stuff.
Right. As long as you say that, it still seems like a respectable kind of dualism. If you look at the ranges of positions that people have held, you do find people with intermediate sort of positions. The thing that's really important is, why do you believe in a soul? Why do you believe in this extra something or other?
What do you really believe?
So you're calling me out. Well, let's say I feel quite convinced that phenomenal states really are distinct from any material goings-on inside this body. So then I wonder, well, what is their subject? And, is it a brain or some part of my brain? And I confess that I'm sort of hopeful that it's not. It's something else.
While most philosophers eviscerate and discard dualism, Dean's hoping for something else, beyond the physical. I am hoping too. But hope can thwart reason and distort belief. That's why, in the dead of winter, I'm in New York to meet up with Colin McGinn, a British philosopher at the University of Miami. Colin's a Mysterian in that he doubts human minds can ever comprehend consciousness. So why is he not a dualist?
So let's start with dualism. It's the older view. Dualism is the view that there are two kinds of substance in the world. There's matter, and Descartes understood matter to be defined by extension, extended substance. It's a spatial notion. And then there's mental substance or spiritual substance, which is non-spatial substance, and the essence of that, according to Descartes, was thought. And then he had the question of how these two things are connected to each other. And he thought that they interacted with each other. So he thought that events in the brain would cause events in the mind, and events in the mind would cause events in the brain. And this is how perception worked, this is how action worked.
And mind would be some other real kind of stuff.
Mind was a kind of stuff of its own special kind, existing somewhere. Descartes was rather vague about where it might exist, because if it doesn't have extension, it can't be in space. So he had the problem of how the two interact, and that's called the problem of interaction. By what conceivable mechanism could a substance whose definition is to be extended in space interact with something whose definition is to be unextended out of space? So that was the classic problem with dualism, the problem of interaction. There are other problems too. Where does the mind come from? What's its origin? If you can join the view to a theistic view of the universe, then at least you can say that God is the cause of the mind. So when a person develops, say from the embryo upwards through childhood to adulthood, the brain is developing on its own track, this way, by physical processes, and Descartes was a mechanist about that. But parallel with that, the mind is developing. How does it change? Where does this change come from? Not from the brain, because that's not, according to Descartes, the mind doesn't have its being derived from the brain. So God is somehow propelling the whole process along. What other explanation could we have of that? So you have to bring God in to explain how the mind comes into existence, and also how it develops, because there's no account of the development of the mind in an individual's history. All the problems of God come in to haunt you, of course, as soon as then you have to have a theory in which you've explained the existence of God. And you've got to be a theist to bring that view into it. Right. And to most people, and to me, that's not an acceptable way to go.
So now let's go on to the physicalism.
Materialism or physicalism. The problem here really is a problem of definition, or whether it's a well-defined notion. So if tomorrow the physicists, which are just a group of people, discover some completely new force, completely new dimension of the natural world, will they say they've discovered something non-physical? Some at first will say, this is nothing like what we have so far, and those people say, it's immaterial, non-material. Others will say, well, we discovered it, and we're physicists, so let's call it material. So suppose they were to discover that panpsychism is true. Suppose they found that they couldn't explain the movements of particles in terms of the usual physical properties, and they found they had to postulate will-like properties in there. Then they would say that these properties were physical.
Right, right. So physicalism becomes an open-ended...
It's so open-ended. So if the question is physicalism true, the answer is vacuously so. It is. Because the mind is part of the natural world. The mind results from the ordinary natural world, from biology and evolution and so on. It's part of that world. So in a very broad sense, it's part of the material world. I myself think there's no objection to describing consciousness as a form of matter. Because in the way I see it, matter has many forms.
If you embed consciousness as another form of matter, you're using matter as a synonym for anything. All there is.
All there is.
Colin's a physicalist in the broadest sense of the term. He posits a radically new kind of physical stuff to account for consciousness. The old brain scientist in me recoils. Rather extreme, Colin, don't you think? But then I reflect. Explanations of consciousness are not extreme enough. Perhaps what's needed is a radically new kind of mental stuff. That's why I go to San Francisco to meet Charles Tart, a pioneer in parapsychology and altered states of consciousness. For all that Charlie has seen, he's an unabashed dualist.
Leaving out a whole
but not your daddy's dualist.
Charlie, you have taken the position as a dualist, as someone who believes in dualistic interactionism, and you have called dualism an empirical science. Why is that?
The place you start on all this is the very common sense observation that what goes on inside our minds seems to be somehow different from the solid stuff that happens out here. From that point, things get very complicated. Okay, so for instance, people usually talk about the philosopher Descartes when they talk about dualism, and Descartes defined mind as totally different from material stuff, and then everybody worries about how they can interact. Well, of course, they were defined as non-interacting. So, you know, the mind just ties itself up in knots on that particular one. I'm a pragmatic dualist, okay? And I emphasize the pragmatic because it's not a philosophical position so much as an attempt to deal with actual events that you can observe. The mind in parapsychological experiments is asked to do things that we don't know how to make matter do, to send a telepathic message, to clairvoyantly describe something at a distance, or to heal someone when there's no physical intervention. And sometimes it works. It works often enough that you know that it happens. You know, even after you filter out all the noise of unsuccessful experiments and imagination, sometimes the mind can do this. Okay, well, the mind is obviously interacting with the material. My take on what's going on is that actually clairvoyance and psychokinesis, knowing the state of physical matter, the clairvoyance, and psychokinesis affecting physical matter by mental intention alone, are actually used normally all the time, but they're used for what we might call internal communications. The senses, the physical senses, which are generally the most important information you can deal with because it tells you what's happening around your physical body, all feed into the physical brain. The mind can pick that up by some kind of inner clairvoyance to read the state of the brain. And that keeps the mind informed of what the brain is doing. And then it influences it by psychokinesis. It picks up the results by clairvoyance and so forth. I think this is the normal, the everyday use of this. And it's the abnormal, the relatively unusual use of clairvoyance to go outside the body to something totally different in the physical world, or the like, that even tells us that clairvoyance and psychokinesis exist.
So you are really taking a radically different approach to the mind-body problem than are traditionally done by philosophers or even theologians, certainly by scientists.
Right, yes. Philosophers usually say if mind and matter are different, what's the mechanism for interaction? Well, these parapsychological effects are the mechanism for interaction. This is what experience and the data force me to think. You know, again, it's not some absolute philosophical position. I don't know what the ultimate nature of reality is, but it makes the best sense out of what I see happening. From my perspective, a philosophy of the nature of mind that doesn't take parapsychological data into account is woefully inadequate. It's leaving out a whole important section of reality.
Charlie calls himself a pragmatic dualist because dualism, he claims, is the only way that fits the facts. His wild idea of internal ESP to explain brain-mind interaction is double-dose bizarre. That's why I like it. Though almost certainly wrong, far-out theories highlight the inscrutable essence of consciousness. Even physicalism offers up its own radical explanations of consciousness. And so to Berkeley I go, to ask physicist Henry Stapp about quantum mechanics.
Neuroscientists today are basically materialists. Therefore, the mind isn't doing anything, and it's very difficult to understand why it should be there at all. But why are they materialists? There's a tremendous inertia from the philosophers of the past. And the philosophers of the past were in a situation where the world was understood to be a classical world, which was deterministic, in which the mind had no role. But that physical theory no longer is true. It's known to be untrue. And the new physics, quantum mechanics I'm talking about, has an actual role for consciousness to play, that the laws of quantum mechanics are not formulatable, and you cannot get no predictions out of the theory unless you allow what Bohr calls the choice on the part of the experimenter. In classical mechanics, you start at a deterministic understanding of what happens at the lowest level, and this determinism just builds up. Now, in quantum mechanics, you start at the lowest level, and already there's this uncertainty, this potentiality. And of course, the way it builds up in any nonlinear system, you have a little bit of variations at the lowest level, and it explodes.
So you look at the whole brain as a single quantum mechanical system.
Absolutely, that's the point. The whole brain can have patterns of neurological activity, and it
can this whole table have quantum mechanical patterns of activity?
Well, of course, every system has patterns of activity, but the question is the core reality upon which quantum mechanics is based are these actual occasions. And these actual occasions or actual events are things that have two aspects, which quantum mechanics describes. The one aspect is a collapse of the wave function, action in the physical world. But it's associated with a psychological element, such that there's a close connection between the psychological element and the pattern of neurological activity. In the quantum mechanical understanding of what's going on, you have this template for action, I call it. That's the pattern of neurological activity that's sending out all these nerve impulses just the right way. And it's associated with a conscious intention. In other words, there's an intent, in your mind, there's an intent. And this actual occasion has two aspects. It has the psychological aspect and the physical aspect, which are linked together. The point is, if you look at it quantum mechanically, not classically, the laws of evolution in the physical realm only determine potentialities for something to happen. They do not answer this question of what question is going to be asked. You need something else outside the physical, outside the known laws, to determine what the question will be.
So what you're saying is that consciousness, at least in human beings, is outside the physical laws of our brain, and therefore intervenes and makes the choices within the quantum mechanical systems of our brain. And so you really have two things happening in parallel.
Right. And in order to make the quantum mechanics work, you need another process, which is what question is going to be asked. And you look at the quantum mechanical laws, they do not determine what question is going to be asked. They determine, once you ask the question, how it's going to evolve. In actual practice, these choices are determined by psychological process. So you have a need for a psychological process to make the quantum mechanics work. And Bohr often had a famous quote, "Never forget that in the drama of human existence, we ourselves are both actors and spectators." In the classical worldview, they were just spectators. All they did was watch what was happening, but couldn't do anything. In quantum mechanics, you need them as actors. If the neuroscientists would take the effort, to understand actually how quantum mechanics works, I think they would say, hey, we're missing something here.
Are we all missing something here? I hope so. I hope there's more to me than my brain. But hope, I know, is a great deceiver, and it's gotten me before.
And this structure is
Neuroscience, however, is honest. We know how the brain works, and we'll know lots more. But as for the inner, raw sense of personal awareness, I still doubt we'll ever explain consciousness by neuroscience alone. If physicalism is correct, if I'm just my brain, then ultimately, consciousness will be reproduced in non-biological substrates. But it's impossible to ever know for sure whether other minds, human or non-human, truly have inner experiences.
Existing somewhere, Descartes was rather vague about where
Here's my bottom line.
if it doesn't have extension,
Explaining consciousness will require something radically new. Either imagining physical stuff beyond current boundaries or revealing the reality of non-physical stuff. No matter, trying to solve the mind-body problem is edging closer to truth.
For complete interviews and for further information, please visit closertotruth.com.